Hello guys, in this video let us discuss public IP versus private IP. So basically guys, public IP, it means the IP which is globally visible and using which we can connect to the device from public internet. So for example, if you have a VM in Azure Virtual Network, so of course that VM, it will have some public IP address. So we can connect to that VM using that public IP only. So again, public IP, it means to connect to that device or that resource over the public internet. And what is this private IP? So basically private IP, it is used within a network only. Okay. So of course we will discuss public IP and private IP in detail, and we will also discuss that why we are discussing this public IP versus private IP concept. Okay. So again guys, assume this is our VNET. So this is VNET. And let's say we have created a VM within this VNet. Okay, so let's say this is a VM. So again, this is VM. So obviously this VM, it will have public IP as well as private IP. So this is public IP and let's say this is private IP. So what it means is, if anybody over the public internet, if that person wants to connect to this VM, he will be using this public IP only. Okay, so let's say this is public internet. So from this public internet, if you want to access this VM, let's say using RDP, that is remote desktop, so you will be using this public IP address only. Okay, so from public internet, if you try to connect to this VM using this private IP address, it won't work. Okay. Okay, then why we have this private IP? So it's because resources within the same VNet, they can communicate with each other using private IP. So for example, let's say we have another VM. So let's say this is another VM. So again, this is public IP. And let's say this is private IP for this second VM. So what I mean is, these two VMs, that is this and this, they can communicate with each other using these private IP addresses. Okay, but of course they can communicate with each other using public IP address as well. So basically this VM and this VM, they can communicate with each other using this public IP and using this public IP. So that's also possible, but ideally within a VNet, resources, they should communicate with each other using private IP only, and that is by default allowed. Okay, so that's okay, but again, why we are discussing this public IP versus private IP? So it's because as far as possible, access to a public IP for a resource, it should be blocked. Okay, so that the chances of our resource or our VM getting hacked, we are reducing. Okay, because if you have blocked public IP, that means nobody over the public internet can access our resource or VM, right? So first of all, as far as possible, I mean, of course, if there is no option and if you have to expose public IP, then of course you don't have option and you will expose public IP. But if possible and if exposing public IP is not required, then public IP access should always be blocked. And let's try to understand why. So for example, in most of scenarios, so let's say we are working on web app. Okay, so let's say in this web app there are 4 VMs. So this is third VM, this is fourth VM, and now we are sure that we don't want to allow anybody from public internet to access any of these VM, neither this, neither this, neither this, but rather we have a web app, and here we are using something called application gateway. So let's say we have application gateway over here. So this application gateway, we are hosted a web app, and behind the scene, that web app is handled by these 4 VMs. So obviously there is no need to provide direct access to these VMs, right? So what we will do in this case is, we will simply block access to public IP addresses of all these VMs. Okay, and we will allow every request to go through this application gateway only. But of course, public IP for application gateway, it will be open. Okay, Otherwise, how external users, they will try to connect to this application gateway, right? So public IP for this application gateway, it will be open, but public IP for this VMs, it will be blocked. And now, as you can guess, because we have public IP blocked, so chances of cyber attacks on these VMs or these VMs getting hacked, they are less, because the only way to communicate with these VMs is through private IP addresses only. So that's it guys. Thanks for listening.